get more now on those financial battles happening in Washington with our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Aaron.
Well, there are two different issues here that U.S. politicians are arguing over, but they are intertwined. Why does the U.S. government risk running out of money?
The reason is partly technical and partly political. So every year, Congress has to pass 12 what are called appropriations bills to keep the government funded and essentially the lights on. This year, they've passed none. And that in itself is not very unusual because actually it happens almost every year. So instead, they have to revert to this stopgap legislation we've been talking about, what's called a continuing resolution to keep essentially money flowing into government coffers. That's what we're expecting a vote on in a few hours' time, which could avoid a shutdown for another few months. Shutdowns, though, also aren't that unusual in recent history. In fact, there have been 14 of them since 1981. The longest was at the end of 2018, which lasted for 35 days. It's estimated to have cost around $31 million a day, a total of $11 billion in total. Running up these costs is exactly what Democrat politicians are now trying to avoid.
So that's one of the issues, but what's the other one?
This is the debt ceiling. It's the American government's borrowing limit, also has to be voted on by Congress. Now, a 2-year suspension of the borrowing limit came to an end at the start of August. The limit was set then at $28.4 trillion, a massive amount of money. The problem is that the national debt in the United States keeps rising because America spends more than it takes in. So the national debt is actually now bigger than the amount that America is allowed to borrow. So essentially they've gone over their overdraft limit, and that's where we find ourselves now. The issue is that that's such a huge amount of money. It's actually more than the American economy produces in an entire year. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the US government will now run out of money by October 18th. Democrats had been trying to tie this issue around government funding to the debt ceiling to try and get it all passed together. That's now not working, which is why we're seeing this stopgap legislation being pushed forward. Failing to raise the debt ceiling is something that's much more serious. It's unprecedented. Never happened in history that America hasn't been able to pay its debts. If it did happen, the consequences would be huge, not only for the US, but also for the whole global economy. The world relies on America to pay its debts, for it to be a sure bet, a sure place to put your money. If it doesn't happen, there'll be big financial consequences for all of us.
And how is all of that going down on the market, Stephen?
So interestingly, investors are watching closely what's happening in Washington, but there's no sign of any great worries on the markets and trading today anyway. The European market starting the day up at the start of trading. We've got gains across London, Paris and Frankfurt. Asian trading had a bit more of a mixed picture. We are keeping an eye on shares in the Chinese property developer Evergrande. They've had a lot of financial trouble recently as well. They missed a second debt payment on Wednesday. Their shares down around 4% in Hong Kong today.
And turning to Iran now, Stephen, where spiraling inflation, unsurprisingly, is affecting life there.
High inflation in Iran has been a problem now for several years. It spiked again during the pandemic and has risen even higher over the past few months as oil prices have slumped. Now, continuing price increases make life difficult for everyone, and the government there is expecting poverty to increase sharply. Camille Nedelec has the story.
These shoppers are feeling the squeeze. Inflation in Iran has soared to over 45%. Rising food prices hit the country's poorest hardest as they spend a higher proportion of their income on basic necessities. As a result, poverty has increased sharply.
مثلا ماهی اگه مثلا اون موقع 15 روز 10 روز یه دفعه میرفتم میخریدم الان ماهی یه بار میرم ماهی یه بار 3 کیلو میگیرم یا 4 کیلو میگیرم مثلا یه ماه و نیم استفاده میکنم اینجوری قناعت میکنم.
Inflation started to soar in 2018 after the US reimposed sanctions. A shortage in dollars prompted the government to print more money. The Iranian rial is now about 270,000 to the dollar, compared with 32,000 rials in 2015. That's made imports more expensive and shrunk the value of salaries and savings.
ریشش در همون ناکارآمدی‌های اداری اجرایی و داخلی است. اما وابستگی یا تداوم وابستگی ما به فروش نفت و تأمین نیازهای بخش تولید و مصرف از طریق ارزهای نفتی باعث شده که توی شرایط تحریم آسیب پذیرتر بمونیم و بنابراین بعد از تشدید تحریم ها این آسیب پذیری خودش رو نشون داد.
Things got even worse due to the global pandemic and slump in oil prices last year and won't get better anytime soon. Inflation is forecast to remain stubbornly high in the coming years.
Moving on now, we have a very different example of inflation in the United States, Stephen.
Dollar Tree is a shop that's made its name, unsurprisingly, for selling things for $1, but now it's going to start increasing prices as a result of rising costs. Prices are going to go up to $1.25 or $1.50, and they're also going to add more expensive items for $3 or $5. The retailer's CEO says these price increases are due to the costs the company's facing, particularly when it comes to transport. And while it might be bad news for shoppers, the announcement sent shares in Dollar Tree up over 16% on Wall Street on Wednesday.
If things are no longer $1, I don't know why
How
the
they
Dollar
can call
Tree
it Dollar
exists,
Tree,
but
exactly.
hey.
Our fundamentals are being shaken by this news.
Be close to $1 Dollar Tree. So. Thank you, Stephen Carroll, with that business update.